The morning air felt different somehow as Andrew stepped out of the sleek black SUV with tinted windows. His heart pounded against his ribs while he watched the vehicle pull away, his father's driver nodding once before disappearing into the flow of morning traffic. This was his third school in 2 years, and Andrew had mastered the art of being invisible. Westlake High School stood before him like a fortress, the brick building crowded with students who had known each other since kindergarten. Andrew adjusted his backpack, deliberately playing despite his father's insistence that he could afford something nicer. That was exactly the problem. He didn't want anyone knowing what his family could afford, or worse, how they afforded it. "You got this," he whispered to himself, words his mother used to say before she left them 4 years ago, unable to handle his father's lifestyle anymore. The hallways buzzed with the chaotic energy of teenage life. Andrew kept his eyes down, mentally mapping escape routes and quiet corners, habits he'd learned growing up in his father's world. He found his locker and quickly stashed his jacket, keeping movements efficient, not drawing attention. "You must be the new kid," a voice said behind him. Andrew turned to see a boy with glasses and a friendly smile. "I'm Ryan. I'm supposed to show you around." "Anda," he replied, offering nothing more. He'd learned that every detail shared was a potential weakness exposed. Ryan didn't seem bothered by the brevity. "You picked an interesting time to transfer. Most people don't show up with only 2 months left in the school year." Andrew shrugged. "My dad's business moved unexpectedly. It wasn't exactly a lie." After the situation in Chicago got too hot, his father had decided Atlanta would offer new opportunities, both legitimate and otherwise. Throughout the morning, Andrew noticed the curious glances and whispered comments. He was used to it. In a school where diversity wasn't the strong point, he stood out. But it wasn't just that. Something about him made people uneasy, like they could sense he carried secrets. By lunchtime, Andrew had successfully avoided most conversation and taken mental notes of the school's social hierarchy. He found an empty table in the cafeteria corner with a clear view of all entrances, another habit he couldn't shake. "Mind if I join?" Ryan appeared again, not waiting for an answer before sitting down. "So where'd you move from?" "Chicago," Andrew said, picking at his food. "For real? That's cool. What did you do there for fun?" Andrew almost smiled. Fun wasn't exactly abundant in his life. Between his father's strict rules about who he could talk to and where he could go, most of his time was spent studying or working out in their home gym. "Nothing special," he said, "mostly hung out at home." A commotion across the cafeteria caught their attention. A tall boy with an athlete's build was holding court at a table full of similarly athletic-looking students. "That's Dex," Ryan said, following Andrew's gaze. "Captain of just about every sports team and self-appointed king of Westlake. Best to stay out of his way." Andrew nodded, watching as Dex laughed too loudly at something, his eyes scanning the room like a predator. When those eyes landed on Andrew, there was a moment of assessment, a calculating look that Andrew recognized all too well. On the way to his next class, Andrew's phone buzzed. A text from his father. "Meeting ran long. Ray will pick you up. Don't talk to anyone unnecessarily." Andrew slipped the phone back into his pocket. His father, Darius, had been holding a lot of meetings lately. He claimed they were about legitimizing the family business, but Andrew knew better. The move to Atlanta wasn't just about new opportunities, it was about expanding territory. As the final bell rang, Andrew gathered his things, careful to be neither the first nor last person out of the classroom. As he walked toward the school entrance, he spotted the black SUV already waiting. Ray, his father's most trusted man, stood beside it, sunglasses hiding his eyes, but not the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Andrew felt the stares as he walked to the car. He heard someone whisper, "Who's that kid?" And another replied, "Dunno, but that doesn't look like someone's dad picking him up." If only they knew. 3 weeks passed, and Andrew had almost convinced himself that he might actually survive this school. He kept his head down, did his work, and spoke only when necessary. Ryan still sat with him at lunch sometimes, but seemed to understand Andrew's need for space. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Andrew was walking to his history class, mentally reviewing dates for the upcoming test, when he felt something hit his shoulder. He turned to find Dex and 2 of his friends leaning against the lockers, smirking. "Nice shoes," Dex said, looking down at Andrew's plain sneakers. I figured with that fancy car that drops you off, you could afford something better. Andrew said nothing, just turned and continued walking. He'd learned long ago that responding only made things worse. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Dex called, louder this time. "Don't they teach manners where you're from?" Andrew kept walking, his shoulders tight but his face carefully blank. He could feel eyes on him from all directions. The hallway had gone quieter as students sensed the brewing conflict. Later that day, Andrew entered the cafeteria and found his usual corner table occupied by Dex and his friends. He scanned the room, looking for another quiet spot, when Ryan waved him over. "I saw what happened earlier," Ryan said as Andrew sat down. "Dex is a jerk to everyone, but he seems to have taken special interest in you." Andrew shrugged. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," Ryan replied, but dropped the subject when he saw Andrew's expression close off. Andrew had just started eating when a shadow fell across the table. He looked up to see Dex looming over them, a tray in his hands and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You know, new kid, I've been wondering," Dex said loudly, drawing attention from nearby tables. "What brings someone like you to our little school? Your daddy in trouble back home?" Andrew felt a chill run down his spine. There was no way Dex could know anything about his father. It was just a lucky guess, a shot in the dark. "I'm just here to learn," Andrew said quietly. "Like everyone else." Dex laughed. "Learn? Right, is that why you never talk to anyone? Why that scary-looking dude picks you up every day? What's that about anyway?" Andrew took a deep breath. "It's nothing. Just leave me alone." "Or what?" Dex challenged, leaning closer. "What are you going to do about it?" Before Andrew could answer, Dex accidentally tilted his tray, sending milk and spaghetti cascading onto Andrew's lap. The cafeteria erupted in laughter as Andrew jumped up, the cold liquid soaking through his pants. "Oops," Dex said with fake concern. "My bad." Something snapped inside Andrew. All the careful control his father had taught him, all the lessons about staying invisible, momentarily vanished. He stepped forward, close enough that only Dex could hear him. "You think this is funny?" Andrew's voice was low, calm in a way that made Dex's smirk falter. "You think you know me? You have no idea who I am or what I'm capable of. You don't know who you're messing with." For a second, fear flickered across Dex's face. Then he recovered, laughing too loudly. "Is that a threat, new kid? Because it sounds like one." "It's not a threat," Andrew replied. "It's a warning." He walked away, ignoring the whispers and stares, heading for the bathroom to clean up as best he could. His hands shook as he dabbed at his pants with paper towels. What had he done? His father would be furious if he found out Andrew had drawn attention to himself. Outside the bathroom, he found Ryan waiting with a gym shirt. "You can wear this for the rest of the day," he offered. Andrew accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You know," Ryan said hesitantly, "what you said to Dex. People are talking. He's not used to anyone standing up to him." "I shouldn't have said anything," Andrew muttered. "Maybe," Ryan agreed, "but it was kind of awesome. Just be careful, okay? Dex doesn't like losing, and in his mind, you just challenged him in front of everyone." On the ride home, Ray noticed Andrew's changed clothes. Something happened at school. "Nothing important," Andrew replied, staring out the window. But they both knew it was a lie. And lies had a way of coming to light in Andrew's family, usually with consequences no one wanted to face. Andrew knew something was wrong the moment he approached his locker the next morning. A small crowd had gathered, their whispers falling silent as he walked up. When they parted to let him through, he saw why. Someone had spray-painted Stenichiche across his locker in bright red letters. Papers that had been inside were now scattered on the floor, some ripped, others stomped on by dirty shoes. "Who did this?" he asked, though he already knew. No one answered. No one ever did. "I'll help you clean it up," Brian said, appearing beside him with a handful of paper towels. Andrew shook his head. "Don't. You'll just make yourself a target too." Ryan hesitated, then set the towels on the ground next to Andrew. "If you change your mind," he said before walking away. A passing teacher, Mrs. Chen, stopped and frowned at the vandalism. "This is unacceptable. Come with me, Andrew. We're going to talk to the principal." Principal Wilson listened to Andrew's story with a bored expression, leaned back in his leather chair. "And you have proof that Dex did this?" he asked when Andrew finished. Everyone knows it was him, Andrew replied. Knowing and proving at different things, the principal said with a sigh. Look, I understand you're upset, but these things happen. Kids can be mean, especially to newcomers. They'll lose interest eventually. So you're not going to do anything? Mrs. Chen asked, clearly disappointed. I'll have the janitor clean the locker and issue a general reminder about school property during announcements, Principal Wilson said. But without witnesses willing to come forward, my hands are tied. Andrew wasn't surprised. People in power rarely helped those who needed it most. That was a lesson he'd learned early from watching his father's business dealings. By lunch, everyone was looking at their phones and laughing. Andrew discovered why when Ryan showed him a photo that was circulating, a poorly photoshopped picture of Andrew crying like a baby with the caption, "New kid runs home to daddy." They don't know when to stop, Ryan said, shaking his head. It's fine, Andrew replied, though it wasn't. Each incident made it harder to stay invisible, harder to keep his promise to his father about staying out of trouble. That afternoon in gym class, Dex made sure Andrew was chosen last for basketball teams. When the game started, Dex deliberately fouled him repeatedly, shoving him to the ground while the teacher was looking away. Oops, Dex said with a smirk, echoing his words from the cafeteria incident. Guess you should watch where you're going. The third time it happened, Andrew felt something snap inside him. As he got up, he whispered, My father would make you disappear for less. Dex's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. Your father? The scary driver? What is he, some kind of bodyguard? Andrew said nothing more, mentally cursing himself for the slip. He'd revealed too much already. After school, he was relieved to see his father's car instead of Ray waiting for him. His relief was short-lived when he saw his father's expression. Get in, Darius said, his voice eerily calm. They drove in silence for several minutes before Darius spoke. Your principal called me today. Something about vandalism on your locker. It's nothing, Andrew said quickly. Just kids being stupid. Nothing? His father's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. My son is being targeted and you call it nothing. I can handle it. Like your mother handled things. By running away? The words stung. Andrew looked out the window, blinking rapidly. Darius sighed. I didn't mean that. It's just, I moved us here for a fresh start, for both of us. I know. So tell me what's really going on. Andrew hesitated. His father had enough to worry about with the business transition. Besides, Darius Johnson didn't solve problems with words. He solved them with actions that often left others afraid or worse. It's just normal new kid stuff, Andrew insisted. Some guy thinks he runs the school and doesn't like that I don't worship him. I'm handling it. Darius studied his son's face. You sure? Positive. They pulled into the driveway of their new house, large enough to be impressive without drawing too much attention in the upscale neighborhood. As Andrew got out, his father called his name. Remember what I taught you, Darius said. You're a Johnson. We don't back down, but we don't escalate unnecessarily either. Be smart about this. I will, Andrew promised. Inside, he went straight to his room and closed the door. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We're not done with you, you kid. Downstairs, Darius made a phone call. I need information on Westlake High School, he said quietly. Everything you can find. Student records, teacher backgrounds, security systems. Everything. The person on the other end didn't question why. No one questioned Darius Johnson. For 3 days, Andrew managed to dodge Dex and his friends. He changed his routes between classes, ate lunch in a library claiming he needed to study, and stayed close to teachers during breaks. It was exhausting, but it worked until Friday afternoon. Andrew had stayed late to finish a math test. By the time he walked out of the school, the buses were gone and the parking lot was nearly empty. He checked his phone. No messages from his father or Ray. He'd have to walk home. He was halfway across the football field, taking a shortcut, when he heard footsteps behind him. Before he could turn around, someone shoved him hard from behind. Andrew stumbled forward, catching himself before he fell. Going somewhere, new kid? Dex's voice made Andrew's stomach drop. He wasn't alone. 2 of his friends stood nearby, blocking the exit from the field. I'm just going home, Andrew said, keeping his voice steady. I don't want trouble. Dex laughed. Funny thing about trouble. Sometimes it finds you anyway. The first punch caught Andrew off guard, landing on his right cheekbone. The second hit his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. He dropped to one knee, struggling to breathe. Not so tough now, are you? Dex taunted. What was that you said about your daddy making people disappear? Andrew tried to stand, but one of Dex's friends kicked his legs out from under him. He fell hard onto the grass. Years of his father's warnings echoed in his head. Don't fight back unless you can win. Don't draw attention. Don't make scenes. But as the kicks kept coming, Andrew couldn't just lie there. He rolled away and somehow got to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. 3 against 1, Andrew said, backing away. Real brave. Shut up. Dex lunged forward, grabbing Andrew's shirt and tearing it as Andrew twisted away. What happened next was a blur. Andrew remembered landing a solid punch to Dex's jaw, remembered the satisfying sound it made. He remembered one of the other boys pulling out a small knife, the blade glinting in the afternoon sun. He remembered thinking that his father would be so disappointed. When it was over, Andrew had a cut above his eye that wouldn't stop bleeding, bruised ribs, and a torn backpack with his homework scattered across the field. Dex and his friends had walked away laughing, taking Andrew's phone with them. Andrew limped home, using his torn shirt to wipe blood from his face. Each step hurt. He hoped his father wasn't home yet. Maybe Ray could help him clean up before Darius saw him. No such luck. His father's car was in the driveway, along with 2 others he didn't recognize. Business associates, probably. The worst possible timing. Andrew tried sneaking in through the side door, but Ray spotted him from the kitchen. Kid, what happened to? Ray stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening. Boss, you need to come here. Footsteps approached quickly. Andrew braced himself. His father appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. Darius's expression changed from irritation to shock to something cold and dangerous. Who did this? His father's voice was quiet, too quiet. It's nothing, Andrew mumbled. I fell during gym. Don't lie to me. Darius turned to his associates. Give us a minute. After they left, Darius led Andrew to the bathroom and began cleaning his wounds with surprising gentleness. That cut needs stitches, he said, examining Andrew's eyebrow. Ray, bring the car around. At the emergency room, the doctor asked too many questions. Andrew stuck to his story about falling during sports. His father said nothing, just watched with that same cold expression. Later that night, after the stitches were in and the painkillers had dulled the worst of it, Andrew sat on his bed while his father stood in the doorway. The truth, Darius said. Now. The dam broke. Everything poured out, the bullying, the locker vandalism, the threats, and finally the attack. As he spoke, Andrew watched his father's face grow darker. 3 boys did this to you, with a knife. It wasn't a question. The knife was just to scare me, Andrew said quickly. They didn't really use it except, he gestured to his stitched eyebrow. Names, his father demanded. Dad, please. I don't want. Their names, Andrew. Dex Wilson is the leader, the principal's son. Andrew hesitated, then added, the others were Thomas and Brett. I don't know their last names. Darius nodded once, then turned to leave. Dad, Andrew called after him. What are you going to do? His father paused. When I was your age, he said slowly, something similar happened to me. A group of boys decided I didn't belong in their neighborhood. They cornered me after school. He touched a small scar on his jaw that Andrew had always wondered about. My father did nothing, said I needed to fight my own battles. Andrew waited, sensing there was more to the story. 2 weeks later, I put one of those boys in the hospital, Darius continued. That's when I learned how easy it is to cross a line you can't uncross. That's the day my path was set. He looked at Andrew with unusual intensity. I don't want that for you. Then what will you do? Andrew asked again. I'll handle it, his father promised. My way. But without crossing lines that can't be uncrossed. Trust me on this. As his father left the room, Andrew wondered what exactly handling it meant in Darius Johnson's world. Whatever it was, Dex and his friends had no idea what was coming their way. Andrew stayed home from school on Monday. His father insisted, though Andrew worried about falling behind in his classes. By Tuesday, the bruises on his face had faded enough to cover with his hoodie, and he returned to school with a new phone and a quiet determination to keep his head down for the remaining weeks of the semester. But something had changed. As he walked through the hallway, he noticed students watching him, whispering behind their hands. Not with the usual mockery, but with something that looked almost like fear. At his locker, Ryan was waiting. "Man, where were you yesterday? I tried texting, but it said your number was disconnected." "Got a new phone," Andrew said, not explaining why. "What's going on around here?" "Everyone's acting weird." Ryan glanced around nervously. "You haven't heard? Dex's car got trashed over the weekend. Someone broke all the windows and slashed the tires, left it right in the school parking lot." Andrew's stomach dropped. "That's crazy." "That's not all," Ryan continued, lowering his voice. "Principal Wilson got some kind of package yesterday. Nobody knows what was in it, but he canceled his meetings and went home early. Looked white as a ghost." Andrew opened his locker, trying to appear casual while his mind raced. His father had promised to handle things, but this was moving fast. "There's something else," Ryan said, hesitating. "Thomas's dad. He works at that big insurance company downtown. He said 2 men in suits came to his office yesterday, just to talk. Thomas didn't come to school today." Before Andrew could respond, the warning bell rang. As students scattered to their classrooms, he caught sight of Dex at the end of the hallway. Their eyes met briefly. The usual swagger was gone from Dex's walk. He quickly looked away and disappeared into a classroom. In English class, Mrs. Chen returned their essays. "Nice work, Andrew," she said as she handed him his paper with an A written at the top. "Your analysis of the power dynamics in Lord of the Flies was especially insightful." Power dynamics. Andrew almost laughed at the irony. He understood more about power than most adults, having watched his father wield it his entire life. At lunch, Andrew was surprised when Ryan sat down with him along with 2 other students he barely knew. "This is Lee and Ava," Ryan explained. "They're in my coding club." Andrew nodded hello, confused by the sudden social attention. "That looks painful," Ava said, gesturing to his eyebrow where the stitches were visible. "What happened?" Andrew touched the wound self-consciously. "Just an accident." Lai snorted. "We heard Dex and his friends jumped you after school." "Typical." "Why would you think that?" Andrew asked carefully. The 3 exchanged glances. "Because of what's happening to them now," Ava said. "Everyone's connecting the dots." "What dots?" "Come on," Lai said with a half smile. "Dex messes with you, then his car gets destroyed. The principal fails to help you, then gets some mysterious package that freaks him out. Brett's dad suddenly transfers him to another school. Thomas is MIA. It's pretty obvious someone powerful has your back." Andrew's appetite vanished. "That's just coincidence." None of them looked convinced. After school, Andrew was surprised to see his father waiting in the car instead of Ray. He climbed in, heart pounding. "How was school?" Darius asked casually. "What did you do?" Andrew countered. His father pulled away from the curb smoothly. "I merely pointed out some unpleasant realities to certain individuals. By destroying Dex's car, I have no idea what happened to the boy's car," Darius said, his face unreadable. "Though I'm not particularly sorry to hear about it." Andrew stared out the window. "People are talking, making connections. Let them talk. Nothing leads back to us." "That's not the point." Andrew turned to face his father. "I didn't want this. I wanted to handle it myself or just wait it out." Darius's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Like I waited it out, like I let those boys break my arm and tell me I didn't belong. The world doesn't reward patience, son. It rewards strength." "This isn't strength," Andrew argued. "It's fear. Now people at school are afraid of me. They're only talking to me because they think I've got some kind of protection. Don't you?" The simple question hung between them for a long moment. "I wanted to fit in," Andrew said finally. "To be normal." Darius sighed. "Normal is overrated, but I understand." He pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. "I did what I thought was necessary, what any father would do to protect his son. Most fathers would call the school or the police." "Would that have worked?" Darius asked pointedly. Andrew thought about Principal Wilson, Dex's father, and his dismissive attitude. No, he admitted. Exactly. Darius reached over and gently touched Andrew's stitched eyebrow. No one hurts my family without consequences. That's the way it's always been. As they walked into the house, Andrew's phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Dex is looking for you. Says he wants to talk. Alone. Andrew stared at the message, his finger hovering over the Ripley button. Whatever his father had set in motion wasn't over yet. Andrew stared at Ryan's text for a long time. Dex wanted to talk. Alone. Every instinct told him it was a trap, another ambush waiting to happen. But something else, curiosity maybe, or pride, made him respond. When and where? The reply came quickly. Bleachers. Tomorrow. Lunch period. Andrew didn't tell his father about the message. Darius had been making more phone calls than usual, speaking in hushed tones behind closed doors. Whatever game he was playing with Dex's family and the others, Andrew didn't want to add fuel to the fire. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the beating in his mind, feeling the phantom pain of fists and kicks. But now, mixed with those memories were images of Dex's car with smashed windows, the principal receiving some mysterious package, and the frightened looks on his classmates' faces when they spoke to him. His father's world was bleeding into his, and he wasn't sure how to stop it. The next morning, Ray drove him to school, studying him in the rearview mirror. "Everything good, kid?" Ray asked as they pulled up to the school. "Yeah, fine," Andrew lied. Ray nodded, unconvinced. "Your dad's looking out for you. Remember that." Classes dragged by that morning. Andrew couldn't focus on anything the teachers said. When the lunch bell finally rang, he told Ryan he needed some air and headed for the football field alone. Dex was already waiting under the bleachers, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked different somehow, smaller, less sure of himself. The bruise on his jaw from Andrew's punch had faded to a yellowish smudge. "You came," Dex said, sounding surprised. Andrew stayed a safe distance away. "What do you want?" Dex glanced around nervously. "Look, I need to know. What does your father want from my dad? Is it money? Because we don't have that much, no matter what people think." "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," Dex snapped, then immediately looked regretful. "Sorry, I'm just... Look, my dad's freaking out. He got those photos and the note about our family, and then some guy shows up at his office talking about how unsafe schools can be these days. Yesterday, our home alarm system went off for no reason. 3 times. Andrew felt sick. His father's methods were becoming clear. I don't know anything about that." "Right." Dex laughed bitterly. "Your dad just happens to be sending men to intimidate my father while driving a car that costs more than our house, right after I messed with you. That's one hell of a coincidence." A group of students walked by, glancing curiously at the two of them under the bleachers. They quickly moved on. "I didn't ask him to do anything," Andrew said once they were alone again. "But you know who he is." Dex stepped closer. "Everyone's talking. My dad made some calls. Your last name is Johnson, right? From Chicago." Andrew said nothing, but his expression must have given him away. "That's what I thought." Dex ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely scared now. "Do you know what people say about Darius Johnson in Chicago? The things he's done. You shouldn't believe everything you hear. So he's not a crime boss. Not the guy who supposedly controls half the city's underground." Andrew felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. How had Dex found out so much so quickly? "My dad's in business," Andrew said carefully. "That's all." "Sure? Business." Dex made air quotes with his fingers. "Whatever you want to call it." He took a deep breath. "Look, I came to make a deal. Tell your father to back off. My dad's about to have a nervous breakdown, and my mom's talking about moving us to my grandparents' place in Colorado." "And in exchange?" Andrew asked. "In exchange, I'll leave you alone. Completely. I'll tell everyone at school it was all a misunderstanding. I'll even apologize publicly if that's what you want." Andrew studied the boy in front of him, the school's former king, now practically begging. It should have felt good, but instead, it just made him feel hollow. "I'll talk to my father," Andrew said finally. "But I can't promise anything." "You have to try," Dex insisted. "Please." The desperation in his voice was so genuine that Andrew almost felt sorry for him. almost. Why did you do it? Andrew asked suddenly. Jump me that day? Dex looked away. I don't know. Because you stood up to me in the cafeteria? Because you're new and different? Because my dad's always talking about keeping certain elements out of the school? He shrugged. Pick a reason. They all sound pretty stupid now. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Andrew turned to go, then stopped. I'll see what I can do, he said. But if I were you, I'd stay away from me from now on. For real. As Andrew walked back to the building, he spotted a familiar black car parked across the street. Ray wasn't alone inside. Andrew's father sat in the passenger seat, watching the school with dark sunglasses covering his eyes. The sight sent a chill down Andrew's spine. His worlds weren't just bleeding together anymore. They were on a collision course. Andrew's hands trembled as he walked toward his father's car after school. Ray stepped out and opened the back door, but Andrew shook his head. I'm sitting up front, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Ray glanced at Darius, who nodded once. As Andrew slid into the passenger seat, he could feel his father's eyes on him behind those dark glasses. You were watching me today, Andrew said, not a question but an accusation. Darius removed his sunglasses, tucking them into his jacket pocket. I was ensuring your safety. During a private conversation with Dex. How did you even know about that? His father's expression revealed nothing. I have my ways. The car pulled away from the curb. Andrew watched the score recede in the side mirror, a knot forming in his stomach. Dex knows who you are, he said finally. Who we are. His father's been asking questions about Chicago, about the Johnson family. Darius's jaw tightened. Unfortunate, but not unexpected. Unfortunate. Andrew turned to face his father. You promised we were starting fresh here. That you were going legitimate. How is that supposed to happen if you're sending people to threaten the school principal? I did what needed to be done. But it's not stopping, is it? Andrew pressed. Dex said his family is thinking of moving to Colorado. His dad's having a breakdown. What exactly did you do to them? For a long moment, Darius didn't answer. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Nothing that can't be undone. I simply wanted them to understand that actions have consequences. By scaring them half to death. Fear is effective, Darius replied. But temporary. I had no intention of causing lasting harm. They drove in silence for several blocks. Andrew watched the neat suburban houses pass by, so different from their old neighborhood in Chicago. Dex apologized today, Andrew said quietly. He's terrified of what you might do next. Good. No, not good, Andrew insisted. I don't want this. I don't want to be feared. I don't want to be like, he stopped himself. Like me, Darius finished. Is that what you were going to say? Andrew looked down at his hands. I just want to be normal. Normal. His father repeated the word like it was foreign to him. I tried to give you normal, Andrew. I tried to protect you from my world. But the truth is, we don't get to choose our lives sometimes. The world sees us a certain way no matter what we do. That's not true, Andrew argued. We always have choices. They pulled into their driveway. Darius turned off the engine but made no move to get out. Tomorrow, he said after a moment, there's an assembly at your school. The principal requested my presence to discuss a donation to the athletic department. Andrew stared at his father. A donation? What are you talking about? $15,000 for new equipment. Anonymously, of course, but he knows where it's coming from. You're bribing him. Darius laughed. I prefer to think of it as community investment. Either way, it gives me a perfect opportunity. For what? To end this. The next morning, Andrew entered the school with his stomach in knots. Posters announcing the special assembly were taped to every wall. Students whispered as he passed, but he ignored them, keeping his eyes forward. In first period, an announcement came over the intercom. All students were to report to the gymnasium at 10 a.m. When the time came, Andrew filed in with the others. He spotted Dex sitting with the basketball team, his face pale and drawn. Principal Wilson stood nervously at the podium, adjusting his tie repeatedly. And there, in the front row of seats reserved for guests, sat Darius Johnson. He wore his most expensive suit, the one he saved for important business meetings. His presence seemed to fill the entire gym. As the last students settled in, Principal Wilson cleared his throat. "Good morning, Westlake. Today we have a special announcement regarding a generous donation to our athletic department. But first, there's another matter I need to address." His eyes found Andrew in the crowd, then flicked to Dex. "It has come to my attention that certain students have been engaged in bullying behavior. As your principal, and as a parent, I've failed to take this seriously enough. That changes today." A murmur ran through the crowd. Andrew couldn't believe what he was hearing. Effective immediately, Westlake is implementing a zero-tolerance policy for bullying, Principal Wilson continued. Any student found intimidating, threatening, or harming another student will face immediate suspension and possible expulsion. Andrew glanced at his father, who sat perfectly still, his expression calm but his eyes alert. Principal Wilson turned to Darius. "Mr. Johnson has graciously agreed to fund not only new athletic equipment, but also an anti-bullying program for our school. Mr. Johnson, would you like to say a few words?" Andrew held his breath as his father approached the podium. The gym fell completely silent. "Thank you, Principal Wilson." Darius's voice carried effortlessly through the space. "I moved my family to this community because I believe in fresh starts, in second chances." His eyes found Andrew's in the crowd. Everyone deserves the opportunity to build the life they want without fear, without being judged by their past or their appearance. He paused, or their family. Andrew felt the weight of those words. Around him, students shifted uncomfortably. "I challenge each of you to consider how you treat one another," Darius continued. "The person you bully today might become someone important tomorrow, or they might be important now in ways you don't yet understand." He let that sink in, his gaze moving deliberately to Dex, who shrank in his seat. "Thank you for welcoming my son to your school," Darius finished. "I look forward to being part of this community for years to come." The applause was scattered at first, then grew. As Darius returned to his seat, Andrew noticed Ryan watching him with new understanding. After the assembly, Andrew found his father waiting by the car. "That was unexpected," Andrew said. Darius smiled slightly. "There are many ways to solve a problem. Sometimes the most effective isn't the most obvious." "So that's it. No more intimidation? No more threats? Would you prefer I continued?" Andrew shook his head quickly. "No, this was better." "Good." Darius placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I meant what I said in there, Andrew. About fresh starts. I'm trying to build something legitimate here, for both of us. But that doesn't mean I won't protect what's mine." As they drove home, Andrew thought about how drastically his life had changed in just a few weeks. He'd gone from being the bullied new kid to someone people treated with cautious respect. Not because they feared him, but because they understood there was more to him than they had initially assumed. The next day at lunch, Ryan waved him over to a table where several other students were sitting. "Guys, this is Andrew," Ryan said. "He's into classic hip-hop and destroys everyone at chess." Simple introductions. No mention of his father or what had happened. Just normal teenage conversation. Normal. Maybe not exactly the way Andrew had imagined it, but close enough. For now.